I did not scream when they pushed me. That is what they ask me most afterward. Why? The truth is simple. When the gate closed behind me, and the sound of iron echoed through the cage, I already knew that silence. I had been there before. Not in that exact spot, but in that suspended moment, where the world decides whether you keep breathing or not. The smell came first. Old meat, iron, hot dust, ancient fear, accumulated on the walls. The stands were full. I knew it, even without looking. Too many people for a Sunday. Too many people to pretend it was an accident. I heard the whispers, the suppressed laughter, the quick sound of cell phones being raised. "She isn't coming out alive." Someone said it loud enough. The lion was lying at the back of the cage, thin, his ribs marked like poorly drawn lines under the skin. His eyes were open, watchful. There was no rush in them, no fury, only hunger, a patient hunger. They took 2 steps back when they saw me fall. I didn't. My hands were shaking, but not because I didn't know what to do. They shook because the body remembers before the head does. It always remembers. The lion stood up. The sound of his paws on the dry ground cut through the space like a warning. Every step he took made the air heavier. I felt the weight in my chest, cold sweat running down my back, the metallic taste in my mouth. This was how they wanted it to end. With blood, with screams, with a body that would justify cruelty disguised as a prank. He approached, so close that I felt the heat of his body, so close that any wrong move would be the last. I raised my face. I looked directly into his eyes, and then something happened. The lion stopped. He didn't growl. He didn't attack. He didn't show his teeth. The crowd went silent. A raw, uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that wasn't planned. Because in that moment, inside the cage, there was no animal and no victim. There was a recognition, and everything they thought they knew began to crumble. They always say it was a prank that got out of hand. I've heard that phrase more times than I can count. In the zoo hallways, in the director's office, in whispered depositions, full of careful words trying to avoid admitting guilt. A prank, an accident, a push, a moment of collective stupidity. But nobody slips into a lion's cage. I had worked there for 7 years. 7. Long enough to learn which doors creaked, which cameras didn't work right, which times were too dead for witnesses, and which employees felt too big to be punished. I cleaned up what was left afterward. Food scraps, cigarette butts, crumpled cups, the invisible trash left by those who never look down. I was invisible too. I learned that fast. People say things in front of the person cleaning the floor as if there is no one there. Small confessions, unimportant cruelties, laughter that only exists when you are certain you won't be confronted. On that day, the sun was high. The heat made the animals restless. The lion hadn't eaten since the previous morning. Part of a protocol, part of a mistake, part of something no one would own up to later. I was cleaning near the restricted area when they started. The pushes didn't come all at once. They came in stages. First the words, then the laughter, then the hand on the shoulder. Too strong, too long. I felt the gate behind me even before I understood what was happening. And then, the void. The fall wasn't high, but it was definitive. The kind of fall that allows no return. When I raised my eyes, I saw the lion at the back, and I saw something else. I saw the entire past compressing into that closed space, because no one there knew who I was before that gray uniform. No one knew why I never looked at that cage for very long, or why I avoided working on the days he was fed. They didn't know that I knew that lion before he had a name, before he had bars, before he learned the sound of hunger. While the audience held its breath, I felt something else growing inside me. Not hope, not faith, something older, more dangerous. Memory, because what separates an attack from a silence sometimes isn't strength. It isn't courage. It is history, and mine was about to emerge. I never told this part to anyone. Not to the police, not to the doctors, not to the lawyer who tried to turn my life into numbered lines. Some stories don't survive being spoken out loud. They need to stay where they were born, in the dark, in the silence, the space between one breath and the next. Before the zoo, before the uniform, before learning to disappear into wide hallways and waxed floors, I lived somewhere else. A dry place, hot, where the earth cracked like old skin, and the wind carried enough sand to sting your eyes. I was young. Younger than I should have been to take on so much. My father worked with animals. Not in cages, not for show. It was rescue, transport. Sometimes smuggling intercepted too late. Injured animals, sick ones. Cubs that survived by chance. That lion arrived in the early hours of the dawn. I remember the sound of the truck stopping, the engine still hot, the strong smell of blood mixed with gasoline. I remember the cloth being pulled back, and the small curled body, almost without a defined shape. He didn't roar. He didn't react. He just breathed. Shallow, irregular. He was a cub. Eyes still too big for his face. Disproportionate paws. No mane to speak of. A mistake of nature left alive by oversight. They said he wouldn't survive. They said it with the casualness of those who have seen many die. But he survived. In the first few days, I would sit near him for hours. Not because anyone asked. Because the silence there was different. Cleaner. He slept poorly. He would wake up startled. His body shook even when it wasn't cold. Sometimes he cried. A low sound, almost swallowed by his own chest. I would put my hand near him. I didn't always touch him. I learned quickly that trust isn't demanded. It is offered. He began to recognize me by smell, then by the sound of my footsteps, then by my presence. When I arrived, he would lift his head. His eyes followed my movements. There was no fear there, just attention. We grew up together for a time too short to be fair. He got bigger, stronger, his body responding to what had always been there. Wild, ancient, impossible to domesticate, but possible to respect. My father knew he couldn't keep him. He said it on a windless afternoon. Looking at the ground. He said it without looking at me. The lion needed a proper place. Authorizations. Documents. People who would speak in the name of preservation while deciding fates without ever touching the hot ground. The zoo was presented as the solution. I remember the day they took him away. He resisted the transport. Not with violence, with weight. A body that refuses to go. A gaze fixed on me as they pushed him into the metal crate. I held onto the cloth longer than I should have. No one said anything. They all pretended not to see. When the truck left, something stayed behind. It wasn't just him. Years passed. Life didn't follow a clear path. It never does. People get sick. Money runs out. Places close. What seemed temporary becomes permanent. When I started working at the zoo, it wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. To clean. To carry. To collect what is left over. What no one wants to touch. On the first day, I avoided the feline wing. Not because I was afraid. It took me weeks before I went near the cage. Months until I looked directly at it. When I finally looked, I recognized him even before confirming it. The body was different. Larger. Scarred. The mane irregular. But the eyes were the same. The same way of observing before acting. The same tense calm. He recognized me too. Not on that first day, nor the second, but gradually. A gaze that lingered longer. An approach that wasn't aggressive. A body that stood up when not to attack, but to see. I never told this to anyone, because who would believe it? An invisible cleaning lady and a hungry lion sharing a memory. I spent years avoiding direct contact, doing my work quickly, silent, keeping my distance, but always there, always present. Presence matters more than words. On the day of the push, all of this came back at once. When I fell into the cage, time compressed. I didn't think about protocols. I didn't think about God. I thought about that dawn. About the shivering cub. About the heat of the small body trying to survive. When I raised my face and met his eyes, I didn't see a predator. I saw something that remembered, and he saw something that hadn't abandoned him. While the world held its breath outside, the two of us were trapped in a story that no one else knew, and stories, when recognized, change everything. The silence did not come all at once. It spread. First, the laughter ceased. Then, the whispers. Finally, even the sound of... The cell phones seemed to die in the air. Outside the cage, people didn't know what to do with the absence of a spectacle. The expected violence wasn't happening. The script was failing. Inside, time had a different thickness. I breathed slowly, not because someone had taught me to, but because the body understands when any excess becomes a threat. My arms hung loose at my sides, hands open, not in surrender, in availability, just as I did years ago, when he still fit in 2 arms. The lion took another step, Then another. He stopped again. I felt the hot air leaving his nostrils. The smell was strong, animal, alive. There was no anger there. There was evaluation, a careful reading. He didn't see me as prey. That much was clear. But he didn't see me as something external either. I was included. The people outside began to shout instructions. They told me to move, to run, to scream. None of those voices made sense in there. They were sounds from another world. Everything is solved with sudden movement and loud noise. I remained. My knee touched the ground first, not out of submission, out of exhaustion. The fall had taken its toll. The body knew it before I did. The ground was hot. The sand, coarse. I felt small cuts opening on my skin, but I ignored them. Small pain does not compete with death. The lion tilted his head. That gesture, I remembered it. It was the same movement from when he was a cub and tried to understand something that didn't fit. Strange noise, a new smell, a presence that didn't follow the pattern. I spoke to him, not loudly, not for the audience. I spoke as one speaks to someone who already knows your voice. I used the sound that used to calm him, a low sequence. They weren't words. They never were. Just rhythm, a continuous flow of air and intention, something you don't learn. You remember. The lion closed his eyes for a moment. Someone shouted from the outside. An employee, a superior, someone who had never cleaned anything with their own hands, shouting for them to shoot, to sedate, to resolve it before it became a bigger problem, as if I wasn't one already. The shot did not come, perhaps because no one wanted to take responsibility, perhaps because everyone was too paralyzed to act. Fear also paralyzes, not just those in danger. The lion lay down, simple as that. He lay down just a few meters from me, his tail moving slowly, his body relaxing, but not vulnerable, just present. Yawned. A wide gesture, teeth on display, a silent warning of power that didn't need to be used. It was at that moment that I cried, not loudly, not to be seen. The tears fell without sound. They fell because the body finally understood that it was still alive. That memory had enough weight to suspend instinct. Outside, no one knew what to do with that. There was no ready-made narrative to explain a cleaning lady kneeling in a cage, while a hungry lion rested a few steps away. There was no clear culprit. There was no evident miracle, just a mistake that refused to end the way it should. It took them too long to open the gate. When they did, I didn't stand up immediately. I didn't want to startle him. I didn't want to break that fragile, silent agreement. I stood up slowly. I looked at him one last time. He opened his eyes. He didn't move. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a confirmation. When I stepped out, my legs nearly failed. Hands held me. Voices spoke all at once. Questions collided. Didn't answer. Not at that moment. They covered me with a blanket that smelled of cheap plastic. They put me in a chair. Someone tried to give me water. My hands were shaking now, the body releasing what it had held back. They took the lion to the internal area. The gate closed with the same metallic sound as before. But now, the sound was not a sentence. It was a closing. In the following days, everything turned into noise. Interviews, reports, closed-door meetings, words like security, failure, inappropriate conduct, isolated incident. No one used my name. I was the employee, the body that almost died, the inconvenient detail. They called in specialists, biologists, veterinarians, behavioral psychologists, people who spoke about instinct, hierarchy, territoriality. None of them spoke about memory. None of them asked about the past. I didn't tell them either, because to explain it would be to allow them to turn it into a scientific curiosity, into a controllable exception, into something that could be repeated without respect. And it wasn't that. The lion began to be fed more frequently, as if that explained everything, as if hunger were the only factor, as if recognition didn't have its own weight. I continued working there for a while longer. People looked at me differently now, some with fear, others with uncomfortable reverence. No one got too close. I was no longer invisible, but I wasn't quite a person either. I was something between a survivor and an anomaly. The lion watched me whenever I passed. He never got too close. He never retreated. He kept the right distance, the distance that recognizes without invading. And then one day I was called to the director's office. They said it would be better for everyone if I left. that my presence might confuse the animal, that the episode needed to be closed, filed away, forgotten. I signed the papers without arguing. Before leaving, I passed by the cage one last time. He was lying in the sun. He opened his eyes as I approached. He lifted his head. Nothing more. I didn't need to say anything. Some stories don't ask for continuity. They ask for silence. But the world doesn't like silence, and it would still collect the price for it. The silence did not last. It never does. For a few weeks, they tried to keep everything under control. Closed doors, internal orders, glances too harsh for anyone asking questions. The zoo needed to keep running. Children needed to laugh. Families needed to take photos. The city needed to pretend everything was normal. I was no longer there. I went back to being what I had always been outside those walls. Disposable. A name crossed off a list. A returned uniform. An uncomfortable episode that no one wanted to remember, but no one could quite forget. My body took longer to understand that it had survived. I would wake up at night to the sound of metal closing, with the smell of the cage stuck in my throat. Sometimes I dreamed that he finally attacked, not out of anger, but for the sake of correction, as if the world were trying to rewrite what had gone wrong. I always woke up before the end. The news started small, a short note in a local newspaper. Employee survives unusual incident with lion. No name, no context. A paragraph squeezed between advertisements. The next day, a video recorded from afar appeared on the internet. Shaky, poorly framed, but enough to cause unrest. People do not like it when something breaks the bee. Rules they learned early on. Comments began to emerge. Theories, hurried explanations. They said the lion was sick, sedated, too weak to attack. They said I had trained the animal in secret, that the whole thing was staged, a marketing stunt gone wrong. Some said I was lucky, others that I was to blame. My name leaked. Someone talked too much. Someone thought it wouldn't make a difference. Suddenly I existed too much. Reporters appeared at the door of the place where I was staying. Repeated questions. Microphones extended like polite weapons. Why didn't he attack? What did you do? Do you believe in miracles? Miracles. That word always appears when people refuse to accept memory as an explanation. I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew what they would do with every sentence. They would cut them, adjust them, turn them into something palatable, something that wouldn't threaten the order of things. Meanwhile, the lion began to change. It was the veterinarian who spoke first, outside of the official tone. A tired man, low voice. He said the behavior was different, that he refused food on some days, that he grew restless at specific times, that he observed the outside area of the cage with a new, uncomfortable attention. They said it was stress. It always is. They transferred him to a more isolated area, less public, fewer stimuli, as if the problem were an excess of eyes and not the right absence. I knew because someone called me, an old colleague. Another cleaning lady, one of the few who called me by my name before everything happened. She spoke quickly, with fear. She said he was getting worse. She said they were talking about a transfer, perhaps to another zoo, perhaps to a center that no one visits. They say it's better this way, better for those who have never been locked up looking at bars for years. After that, the dreams changed. I was no longer in the cage. I was on the outside, watching, unable to do anything. The lion walked from one side to the other. He didn't attack anyone. He didn't sleep. He just paced, as if searching for something that had been removed from the wrong place. I woke up with a heavy chest. The body knows when something has been left unfinished. I received an official letter weeks later. Neutral language, polite. They thanked me for my collaboration. They informed me that the animal would be transferred for reasons of safety and well-being. They ended by saying the case was officially closed. Closed. There is no closure when you separate something that still recognizes itself. I went to the zoo one last time. I didn't announce it. I didn't ask for authorization. I went as a visitor. Just another face in the crowd. Hat pulled low. Sunglasses. The kind of anonymity you only achieve after being exposed too much. The cage was empty. A sign explained the absence. Beautiful words. Commitment to life. Conservation. The public read it. Accepted it. Moved on. But I felt it. The space still held his presence. The marked floor. The faint smell. Almost faded. Memory does not disappear with cleaning. I stayed there longer than I should have. Someone asked me to step away. When I turned, I saw the truck, idling, engine running, reinforced grate, the same sound of heavy metal being adjusted, the same thick cloth covering the interior, the same mistake. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just followed. I saw when they loaded the crate. I saw when they fastened the locks. I saw when no one looked inside. It wasn't necessary. To them, it was already just cargo. When the truck began to move, something inside me broke, because I recognized that moment. And the first time, I had let go. This time, I didn't know if I could survive repeating the abandonment. The world moved too fast after that, and everything that seemed resolved opened up again, like a poorly closed cage. I followed the truck, not out of courage, out of an inability to stand still. I took the first taxi I saw. I didn't explain properly. I pointed. I told him to follow. The driver complained about the traffic, the heat, the lack of sense. I didn't hear him. I was too busy trying to breathe without making a sound. The truck wasn't going fast. It didn't need to. The destination was nearby. A temporary center, they said later. A place of passage. A place where nothing takes root. When they stopped, I already knew. The gate was high. New concrete. Few trees. The kind of place built to look safe, but that carries the same old emptiness. I signed in as a visitor. Fake name, fake ID. No one checked closely. People trust when they want to close something quickly. They took the crate inside. The sound of metal scraping on the floor pierced through my body like a physical memory. The same sound from that dawn. The same weight. The same mistake repeated with the conviction of those who believe that time erases everything. I waited. Hours. The sun began to set when they finally transferred him to the provisional enclosure. Smaller, cleaner, more sterile. The kind of space where life doesn't settle. It only resists. He came out of the box slowly. Slower than before. His body was different. Not weak, tense. An animal that had learned to distrust any opening. He walked to the center, turned his body, observed. There was no audience. Only bars and people too technical to hear what doesn't scream. I was far away, officially, but memory does not respect distance. He stopped, lifted his head, looked in my direction. He couldn't see me properly. There were shadows. There was glass. There were rules. But recognition doesn't need a direct line. It needs a pattern, a presence that cannot be explained. The veterinarian said something. Someone took notes. Someone suggested preventive sedation. The tone was calm, professional, the kind of calm that precedes irreversible decisions. I moved before I could think. I pushed the side door, the one that never closes properly, because no one believes someone would use it without authorization. The alarm sounded low, short, a timid warning. Screams came later. "Ma'am, you can't—" I was already inside. The enclosure wasn't large enough to allow for error. The floor was too smooth. The air, too heavy. There were no stands, no audience, just the two of us and what remained between past and instinct. He turned quickly. The muscles responded as they should, the entire body ready, the hunger there, the exhaustion there, the wrong learning there. I stopped. I didn't advance. I didn't retreat. I raised my hands, not above my head, in front of my body, like before, like always. The sound came out of my throat before I decided to use it. The same sound, the same rhythm, a memory that hadn't aged. He hesitated. It was a second, maybe less, but in that interval, everything was open. All possible versions of the world competed for space. The lion took a step, then another. The screams from the outside became distant. Someone called for immediate sedation. Someone ran. Someone fell. None of that mattered in there. He stopped a few meters away. He growled low. Not as a threat, out of conflict. I saw it in his eyes. The division, the body saying one thing, the memory saying another, nature pulling forward, history pulling back. I knelt, not out of submission, out of truth. The tears came without warning, not because I was afraid of dying, but because I understood I could no longer protect him from anything. Not from me, not from them, not from the world that insists on breaking what it doesn't understand. I said his name, the name that never entered any document, the name that only existed while he still fit in someone's lap. The name that no one else knew. The sound cut through the space like a thin blade. He retreated. He lay down, his entire body on the floor, his chest rising and falling fast, his eyes fixed on me, alert, alive, present. The dart hit his flank seconds later. The roar came too late to change anything. The sedative began to act. The heavy body, muscles yielding against his will. I screamed then, not for myself, for him. They grabbed my arms. They pulled me out. The floor passed quickly under my feet. The doors closed with too much force. The sound echoed through the hallway. When they let me go, I already knew. They didn't kill him that day. Not officially. They said he would be evaluated, re-evaluated, transferred once more. Careful language, low tones, been broken, but something not the agreement, the world that sustained it. That night, while they signed reports and adjusted narratives, he died. They said it was multiple organ failure, complications, accumulated stress. They said no one could have predicted it. They said they did everything right. I didn't see the body. I didn't need to. Some absences are too definitive to require proof. When I left, the sky was already dark, the air cold, too clean, the kind of air that doesn't go well with endings. I walked without a destination. Because surviving isn't always a victory. Sometimes it's just the rest. And that night, all that remained was silence. Afterward, the world moved on. It always does. Not in the same way, not for everyone, but with the cold efficiency of something that knows how to erase tracks. The center released a short note. Technical, too precise. The zoo repeated the text almost word for word. No names, no story, just dates, protocols, and an administrative end. Mourned for a few days, the public, indignant comments, fleeting emotions. Afterward, other news occupied the space. Another video, another scandal, another distraction. I stayed, not in any specific place. I stayed within the gap that remains when something ends without meaning. I rented a small room far from the center. Low windows, little sun, the kind of place where no one asks anything. My body was slow to accept what had happened. I spent weeks waking up at the same time, the time he used to move, inside the cage, as if there were still something to observe, something to watch over. Hunger changed too. Sometimes I forgot to eat. Sometimes I ate too much. The body tries to compensate for what it lost without understanding what it was. People stopped looking for me. Reporters tire quickly when there are no new versions. Lawyers move on to other cases. Employees go back to cleaning other floors. The world is in too much of a hurry for grief that doesn't yield an image. Sometimes, someone would recognize me on the street. The gaze would linger a second longer. An uncertain recognition. The memory of something that doesn't quite fit. No one spoke to me. It was as if I carried a mistake that could be contagious. Perhaps I did. I started working somewhere else. A small hospital. Night shifts. Long hallways. The same kind of heavy silence, but without bars. Cleaning there was different. People breathing. People leaving. People staying. I cleaned the floor while machines beeped. The constant sound of something trying to keep someone alive. There was something honest in that. No illusion of spectacle. Sometimes, when I walked through the empty hallways, I remembered the sound of paws on the dry ground. The rhythm. The presence. Not the attack that never came, but the pause. The moment when the world held its breath. That moment stayed with me. Some nights, I dreamed of him still alive. Not in the cage. Not in the center. In a space too wide to fit in a dream. He walked, without haste. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. I would wake up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not of loss. Of a late conclusion. I never went back to the zoo. I passed near it once. By bus. I saw the high walls, the colorful posters, children entering. Nothing seemed different. And perhaps it wasn't. Places don't change just because something true happened in them. People change, or they don't. I kept few things from the past. An old notebook, some faded photos. None of him. Were never photos. Perhaps that is why it was harder to erase him. Sometimes someone asks. Not directly. Never directly. They ask if it was luck. If I believe in something greater. If I would do it differently. I don't answer. Because it wasn't luck. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't an exception. It was recognition. Something that exists before words and after explanations. Something that doesn't fit in a report or a cage. something that doesn't survive long in a world that needs to classify. Everything too quickly. He didn't save me. I didn't save him either. We just remembered each other in the only moment when it was still possible. And that was enough to suspend death for a few moments. A few moments change an entire life. Others only prove that certain connections were not meant to last, but to exist a single time. Complete, unrepeatable. Today, when I clean the floor and see my distorted reflection in the wet surface, I think about that. Not about the lion, but about the pause, about the absolute silence before everything moved on. Because there are things the world doesn't understand, doesn't accept, and doesn't forgive. And yet, they happen, even if no one is watching.